Who is most responsible for this happening?
What I would say is that the Secret Service is responsible for the protection of the former president.
So the buck stops with you?
The buck stops with me. I am the director of the Secret Service. It was unacceptable, and it's something that shouldn't happen again.
That is a clip from an ABC News interview with Kimberly Cheadle, the head of the U.S. Secret Service. She was responding to what has become an intense and far-reaching investigation into her agency's handling of the attempt on former President Donald Trump's life this past weekend. And things are evolving very fast. So what do we know about what happened? Will Cheadle resign or even be fired? Is this investigation unprecedented? And where do we go from here? We are going to turn to former Secret Service Supervisory Special Agent Charles Ino for all of those answers. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. During the Donald Trump campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania this past Saturday, 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks reportedly climbed on top of a nearby building about 130 to 150 yards away, and at 6:11 p.m., he opened fire on former President Donald Trump. That's the allegations, that he allegedly killed one rally-goer, injured Trump, injured others in the crowd. Within seconds of the shooting, Crooks was fatally shot by Secret Service agents. They were able to neutralize him really quickly. And there are multiple investigations and new developments that are coming in almost by the minute. And as you can imagine, this fast-developing story is a bit challenging to follow, but we want to focus on something right now, something specifically. You see, maybe the most shocking news to come out in the past 24 hours has been about when the Secret Service realized Crooks was a threat. So late Wednesday, it's being reported that senators held a briefing with top Secret Service officials, including the director of the Secret Service, Kim Cheadle. And one senator, John Barrasso of Wyoming, reported that more than an hour before the shooting occurred, the Secret Service had identified Crooks as a character of suspicion because they saw that he had a rangefinder and a backpack. Then, according to Fox News, sources tell them that 10 minutes before Donald Trump walked onto that stage, the Secret Service supposedly changed their assessment. Instead of considering Crooks suspicious, they upgraded his status to a threat. And yet, despite that, the former president was still allowed to step onto that stage. And according to one report from Fox also, the Secret Service agent in charge was actually on the phone with local and state police about that threat while the shooting was taking place. And now new reports say a sniper from a local tactical team assisting the Secret Service took a picture of the gunman, saw him looking through a rangefinder, and then radioed that information to a command post. Well, since the shooting, President Biden and the FBI have launched investigations, then Homeland Security as well. And now lawmakers are demanding answers. And in fact, on Monday, July 22nd, Kimberly Cheadle will come before Congress. She'll testify before the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability. Meanwhile, there's been an increasing chorus of calls for Cheadle to step down immediately. But the question is, how did we get here? How was Crooks able to get into such close proximity to the former president, close enough to shoot him in the ear when another inch or two could have been a catastrophe? He could have been killed. And how did a specialized team of counter snipers fail to prevent what could be the worst security lapse in decades? Well, surprisingly, it seems that Director Cheadle says her agency was aware of these security vulnerabilities that were presented by the building that Crooks used to take aim at Trump. But that decision is facing scrutiny. One law enforcement official said that the sloped roof could have created a visual block to the counter snipers, and a tree may have prevented one of the sniper teams from seeing the gunman as he climbed onto the roof. Cheadle has also responded to reports that the suspect was seen and identified as potentially suspicious before he opened fire, saying that, quote, a very short period of time passed between then and the shooting. However, as I mentioned earlier, the latest report says they might have known he was a person of interest a full hour before he opened fire. She also confirmed that the Secret Service shared support for that particular site, and that while they were responsible for the inner perimeter, they sought assistance from our local counterparts for the outer perimeter. And she continued that there was local police in that building, there was local police in the area that were responsible for the outer perimeter of the building. So with that being said, Cheadle said no assets from the rally were diverted on the day that Trump was shot, even though other events in the state required Secret Service protection. And she also said there was no truth to the rumors that the former president's detail had asked for more resources and was denied. And as for accusations that the Secret Service's role in the event was somehow partisan, Cheadle pushed back, saying the Secret Service is not political. People's safety is not political. And she added that the Secret Service is tasked with the tremendous responsibility of protecting the current and former leaders of our democracy, and it is a responsibility that I take incredibly seriously, and I am committed to fulfilling that mission. While Director Cheadle says she will not resign from her role, and despite these increasingly vocal demands for her to do just that. And now with that in mind, I'd like to welcome former Secret Service Supervisory Special Agent Charles Ino to help us understand the ins and outs of this very evolving story. Charles, thanks so much for coming on. First, let me just start. What was your reaction as a former special agent when you heard the news of the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump?
Yeah, of course. How the heck did this happen? How was it allowed to happen? How was this threat not mitigated? Look, the Secret Service has this statutory responsibility to protect the former president. They also have the responsibility of not only creating, but also effectively implementing the overall security plan for the venue. Let me state, this includes the inner perimeter, the middle perimeter, and the outer perimeter, because they also have the responsibility of requesting state and local law enforcement assets, as they do throughout the entire country, to help implement that security plan. So the Secret Service owns this. They got to take the hit on this. It was their job to make sure that this building was taken out of play. And by that, I mean that it no longer represented a threat and that it was mitigated any way that it needed to be. It could have been putting somebody on the roof. It could have been putting officers around all four sides of the building, locking the doors. So they own this.
Hey, by the way, thank you for coming to us as we continue to follow the latest developments in the Trump shooting. And one of the reasons we're able to do this is because of the incredible support we get from our sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. If you should find yourself in that position where you're hurt and you need legal representation, Morgan & Morgan may be who you want in your corner, because they are specialists in this area. And you know why they're so big? Because they win a lot. Multi-million-dollar verdicts and settlements across this country. They also make the process so easy for their clients, because from starting your claim to uploading documents to signing contracts, talking to your legal team, it can all be done from your smartphone. Also, there's no upfront fee. You only pay them if you win. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar. So first of all, even if they had assigned local law enforcement to secure the building, the buck stops with the Secret Service, right? Did you get the sense that they are improperly putting the focus, and perhaps a better word is the blame, on local law enforcement? I mean, I think that's one of the most alarming things about this.
Yeah, well, look, there's been a lot of statements made so far by the director publicly that are either contradictory, they fly in the face of common sense, or they undercut the proven methodologies of the Secret Service. The Secret Service is not just responsible for the interior regarding protection. That's false. All three rings they are responsible for. And they're responsible for, in the outer perimeter, where this building was located, 130 yards away, elevated with a direct line of sight of the stage and the former president where he'd be speaking. They were responsible for making sure that local law enforcement were doing what they were asked to do.
And there is a little bit of back and forth in terms of whether there was law enforcement in that building, out of the building. I am curious about that kind of comment, and this is something that's been honed in on, that apparently, and correct me if I'm wrong, Director Cheadle was concerned about putting sniper teams up on that roof because of the sloped nature of the roof, that it would have been maybe a danger. But if I'm wrong, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't there another counter sniper team on a very similar shaped roof?
That's exactly right. That's what I mean. You can't make statements like this. You don't need to be a security expert to know what's false and what sounds ridiculous. And, you know, this diminishes the credibility of the agency. Look, we saw the worst of the agency in terms of how this plan was allowed to fail. And we saw the best, the way the men and women responded immediately to cover the former president with their own bodies. So there's no question, and I've been asked this a lot, there's no question about the dedication to the mission of the men and the women of Secret Service. The big question is, under the leadership of this director, do the Secret Service agents have the resources including the manpower, the technology, the special operation teams, the state and local law enforcement support that they need to achieve their mission flawlessly. This is a zero-fail mission. They've got to show up each and every day that they're doing protection and get it right 100% of the time.
When you say resources, if you are talking about protecting a former president and Republican nominee or Democratic nominee, whoever it is, or a contender, is that different than the current president of the United States? Are the resources more limited?
It depends on the threat level of that individual, combined with the threat level in the United States in general, the threat level around the world. You're taking all of this information, the Secret Service is, into their Protective Intelligence Division, and they're consistently doing updated threat assessments on what the manpower should look like and consist of to provide the best job of protection that they can. So these resources are constantly increasing and decreasing. But based on the situation and the uniqueness we have now of being a former president, the Republican nominee for president, and also the threat level, look, you would expect a very high level. And I think what you see now after Saturday's incident is a protection detail that mirrors that of the current president of the United States, and it should.
What about the reports that seemingly the Secret Service knew about this shooter an hour before the shooting occurred? Now, I can't imagine that this would be the first time that someone is in their line of sight they believe is suspicious, that they're keeping an eye on. But when you think about what happened here and the reports that Crooks had been looking around the area, looking at the roofs, that people had noticed him climbing the roof, that there was a law enforcement officer who went up to the roof, but Crooks had allegedly pointed the gun at him and he backed off. Talk to me how to make sense of the idea that he was in their sights for an hour before. They saw him as a person of interest or a suspicious character, and yet Donald Trump was allowed to take that stage.
Well, as we know, whenever you have a catastrophic failure like the Secret Service had on Saturday, it's going to expose other failures in the system. And the one area that we're going to find additional failures in is going to be communication. So let's go through the timeline that you just set up very well. If we're talking about an hour out and thinking that there was a threat that's walking around with a rangefinder that's being armed, that person's got to be located either by state and local law enforcement and then interviewed by the protective intelligence teams that are on the site. If that person can't be found, that information needs to be communicated to the protective detail, because you may not want to bring the former president that far out in advance to the site at all. You may want to take him somewhere else, like a local police department, for him to hang out, or maybe he stays on his aircraft. There's a number of options. Now, if we're talking about the 10-minute out scenario, where you're saying the Secret Service is now confirmed that this is not suspicious person, but an actual threat, then the natural question is, why does the detail bring him to stage? Why do they allow him to go up to the podium? And that's where there's going to be a lot of questions regarding the communication flow. Was it sent at all? Was the information sent at all to the Secret Service detail? Was it sent but not broadly enough and transmitted to them? Or was it ignored? And was there a decision to say, we're going to take them to the stage anyway? All this has to come up during Monday's testimony by the director in front of Congress.
Is it unprecedented for the Secret Service to be investigated in this way? My understanding, there was an internal investigation after the attempt on President Ronald Reagan's life back in the 80s, but I don't know of an external investigation quite like this. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
Well, it's interesting because when you have an assassination attempt, the FBI has a statutory responsibility to come in immediately and assume the lead in the investigation. The Secret Service maintains the crime scene, which was the rally site. Once the FBI shows up, they step aside. They basically become now another reporting agency of the facts and the circumstances to be included in the FBI report. It's no surprise that at the DHS level, we're now seeing the Inspector General get involved. They will conduct their own independent investigation. And then you also have the hearings of Congress that we spoke of, but you also have calls by Congress for now an independent commission. So you could have essentially 3, 4 simultaneous investigations going on. The big thing is how quickly do these investigations move? Because the longer this stays out there, the more the conspiracy theories gain traction. So it's important for all of these investigations to move very quickly, but the Secret Service will not be allowed, as much as they may want to, and they've already been told to stand down, from looking at themselves and assessing themselves. They are now at the mercy of 3, 4 external mechanisms to investigate the agency. It's not unprecedented. It's just been several decades since that's happened.
And thankfully that it's been several decades since this has happened. What could happen from these multiple investigations? Obviously, you have the FBI trying to understand one aspect of the shooting. Was he really acting alone? How did he, come about doing this? Was there any kind of help he received? Trying to understand more the aspect of the shooting. But in terms of putting a spotlight on the Secret Service from these multiple different investigations, what could happen?
Well, first, they're going to look at what went wrong. They're going to look at the operational security plans, the number of agents that were there, the number of Secret Service uniform division officers, how many special operations teams were there, counter snipers, counter assault team. Were they purely Secret Service teams, or were they a hybrid where Secret Service was married up with state and local resources? Like we're hearing, how many police officers from what jurisdictions were requested to come in and support that outer perimeter area? So that visit itself is going to be under a microscope to look at what went wrong there. That's one area they're going to look at. Then they're going to start looking at more systemic things. What are the hiring practices of the Secret Service? This director happens to be very big in DEI. She implemented a program called the 30 for 30 campaign when she became director. That is, she wants the Secret Service workforce to have 30% females by the year 2030. The big question is going to be, in order for her to meet that quota that she put in place, had she lowered standards throughout the agency? So naturally, they're going to then go on to training. Is training still the world-class training that it was when I went through? And they're going to look at operations. They're going to look at resources. And this is where the Department of Homeland Security comes into the conversation. Is the Department of Homeland Security giving the Secret Service the resources that it needs to carry out their zero-fail mission?
And do you think also any potential criminal charges or any civil liability could result from this?
Well, as you said, we had one person killed, 2 people injured critically. So I can guarantee you that on the civil side, since the shooter was eliminated by the counter sniper team, we'll see some things on the civil side from these people. If you notice the reaction from the crowd when the shooting started, and that kind of calmness, that non-chaotic response to the sounds and the actions that they saw, I think there was a lot of shock, because here you are at a site with a former president protected by the Secret Service, right? You've got all of these law enforcement officers around. So the natural thing to do by all these attendees is to relax, because the assumption is I'm in one of the safest places on the face of the earth right now.
I think it was shocking to everybody who was there and everybody was watching. Before I let you go, I want to ask you now the big question, and multiple parts to this. Director Cheadle, there are calls for her to resign. A, do you think she will resign? Do you think that's the right call for her to resign? What's your take on it? And if she doesn't resign, could she be fired? And how could she be fired? What's the protocol there?
So I don't think she'll resign. She has said she has no intention on resigning. Yes, she can be fired. She is a presidential appointee, non-confirmed by the Senate. So it would likely be a joint decision between her immediate boss, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and the President of the United States. What I think is the focus now needs to be on the U.S. Secret Service. The agency has to come out of this stronger than before this situation took place. They need to make sure that they have everything that they need to do their job, as I already said. And I think at this point in time, it can't be about the individual, the director, who has already come out and made too many statements that just fly in the face of common sense. So I think it's undercut the credibility of the agency enough. I think the attention has been too much on her, and I think it really needs to be on the agency right now to make sure that they're able to do their important job, not just for the people they protect, but ultimately for democracy.
And arguably inconsistent statements that she reportedly made as well. Look, I think that Monday hearing is going to be quite illuminating. Spotlight will be put on her, and we will see what those answers are. But these are very difficult questions, and I don't know if we're going to get satisfactory answers. But I tell you what, Charles Ino, thanks for coming on, breaking it down for us, and we will see what the repercussions of this horrible, yet historic event that is, we'll all ask ourselves, where were we when this went down? But Charles Ino, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.